Ethan Walker had built his career from the ground up. He wasn't born into wealth, didn't have family connections to smooth his way into the corporate world. Everything he had earned. Starting as a part-time bank teller during college, balancing long hours at the branch with late-night study sessions, he knew what it was like to work behind the counter, to clock in and out, to worry about making ends meet. That was why, even after becoming the CEO of Meridian National Bank, he refused to lead from an ivory tower. Reports and spreadsheets could tell him about numbers, but they couldn't tell him about people. The real problems. They lived in the break rooms, in the unspoken tension between employees, in the exhausted sighs at the end of a long shift. That's why, every few months, Ethan went undercover. No suit, no title, no corporate entourage, just a regular guy walking into his own banks as a customer. This time, he chose a branch in Cincinnati, Ohio. The numbers looked good, steady profits, strong customer satisfaction scores. But Ethan knew better. Numbers didn't show fear, stress, or a toxic workplace culture. As he pushed open the glass doors of the branch, the air conditioning hit him with a blast of artificial cold. The bank had that early evening quiet, just a handful of customers finishing up before heading home. Employees moved with practiced efficiency, handling deposits and withdrawals like they'd done it 1,000 times before. Everything seemed fine. But then he'd noticed the tension. A middle-aged man at the counter struggled with his debit card, explaining something to the teller. The young woman behind the counter, Rachel Carter, smiled politely, but there was tension behind her eyes. The kind of forced calm people wore when they were trying not to break. Ethan's gaze flickered to the branch manager standing near the back, Glenn Thornton. His posture wasn't just observant, it was controlling. His eyes scanned the room, not like a leader ensuring smooth operations, but like someone watching for mistakes. And then Ethan heard it, a muffled sound. Soft at first. He barely noticed it over the quiet hum of the bank, until the customer in front of him moved along, and the sound became clearer. Someone was crying. Not loud, not dramatic, just a quiet, stifled sob. The kind you let out when you're trying not to fall apart. Ethan turned slightly, following the sound with his eyes. The break room door was slightly ajar. Inside, he caught a glimpse of a young woman, head bowed, fingers gripping the edge of the table like she was holding herself together. Another employee stood beside her, speaking in hushed tones. Ethan didn't know her, but the look on her face hit him like a punch to the gut. Something was very wrong. And he wasn't leaving until he found out. Ethan Walker stood in line at the bank, his body still facing the counter, but his mind was elsewhere. The quiet sobs from the break room lingered in his head. This wasn't just a bad day at work for someone. This was something deeper, something serious. He kept his demeanor relaxed, but his senses were sharp. The tension in the room was thick, like a storm waiting to break. As the line moved forward, Ethan watched the young man behind the counter. His name tag read Miles Parker. He looked fresh out of college, professional, polite, but distracted. "Next customer," Miles called, forcing a smile. Ethan stepped up, pulling a deposit slip from his pocket, a routine he used in every undercover visit. "Just need to make a deposit," he said casually. Miles took the slip, but his fingers hesitated over the keyboard. A small pause, barely noticeable, but Ethan caught it. The kid was nervous. Not just busy, nervous. "How's your day going?" Ethan asked, keeping his voice light. Miles hesitated for a second too long. Then he forced another smile. "Good. Just a normal day." It was a lie. Ethan glanced over at Rachel Carter, the teller he had noticed earlier. She was back at her station, her smile tight, her movements stiff. She didn't just look tired, she looked like she was pushing through something. Then, out of the corner of his eye, Ethan noticed Glenn Thornton, the branch manager, standing near the back. Thornton's eyes weren't on customers, they were on his employees, watching, assessing, controlling. And then it happened. Ethan heard a name. From the break room, the other employee was speaking softly, but Ethan caught the words. "Jasmine, you can't let him do this. He doesn't own you." Jasmine, the girl who had been crying. Ethan's jaw tightened. He had seen workplace stress before. Long hours, difficult customers. But this wasn't stress. This was fear. And he knew the difference. Jasmine's response was quiet, almost too soft to hear. But Ethan caught the words anyway. "What choice do I have?" And then the last part. The part that made his blood go cold. "If I don't do what he says, I'm gone." Ethan's grip tightened on the counter. This wasn't a bad day. This was something much, much worse. He wasn't leaving until he got answers. Ethan Walker stepped away from the counter, slipping his receipt into his pocket. His mind was racing. Jasmine's words stuck with him. "If I don't do what he says, I'm gone." This wasn't just a difficult workplace. This was something else. Something deeper. He took a casual stroll toward the loan officer's desk, pretending to check his phone. From here he had a clear view of the break room. Jasmine had wiped her face and was sitting up straight, but her hands were still trembling in her lap. The young man beside her, Miles, was speaking urgently, his head shaking slightly. She wasn't meeting his eyes. Then Ethan noticed Glenn Thornton, the branch manager, approaching. His movements were calculated, slow, deliberate, like someone who enjoyed holding power over others. As soon as Jasmine saw him, her entire body stiffened. She quickly grabbed her phone, stuffed it into her pocket, and stood up as if she had been caught doing something wrong. Thornton said something Ethan couldn't hear, but Jasmine's response was a small, almost imperceptible nod. Then she walked past him, head down, and returned to the telestations. Thornton remained near the break room door, arms crossed, watching. Ethan had seen this dynamic before. A toxic workplace always carried the same signs. Employees who flinched when a certain manager walked by. Conversations that stopped the moment they entered the room, the silent tension in the air. Not loud, not obvious, but always there if you knew where to look. Ethan had a decision to make. He could leave now and handle this from a corporate level, send HR, investigate from a distance. That was the safe, professional way. But he could get answers right now. Ethan took a deep breath and adjusted his posture. If he wanted people to open up, he needed to approach this the right way. He scanned the room, looking for an opportunity. Jasmine was back at her station, avoiding eye contact with Thornton. Miles was still by the side counter, organizing a stack of deposit slips. His jaw was tight. Ethan walked over, keeping his voice casual. "Hey, do you have a pen?" Miles looked up, startled. "Oh, yeah, of course." He grabbed one from the cup beside him and handed it over. Ethan took it, but didn't walk away. He glanced at Miles' name tag. "Hey, Miles," he said, lowering his voice. "I couldn't help but notice. Your friend seems upset." Miles's expression didn't change, but his grip on the papers tightened. "She's fine," he muttered. Ethan tilted his head. "She doesn't look fine." Miles swallowed, eyes darting toward Thornton, who was now near the back office, speaking with another employee. Then, after a long hesitation, Miles exhaled sharply. "She's not fine." His voice was barely above a whisper, and that's all Ethan needed to hear. He wasn't leaving. Not yet. Ethan Walker didn't need any more confirmation. Something was very wrong in this branch. He wasn't leaving until he figured it out. Keeping his tone casual, he leaned in slightly. "Is it a customer issue?" Miles hesitated. That split second of silence told Ethan everything. "No," Miles muttered, eyes shifting toward Thornton, who was now watching them from the back of the room. "It's personal." It was a lie. Not because Miles wanted to mislead him, but because he was afraid. "How long has Jasmine been working here?" Ethan asked, keeping his voice light, conversational. Miles answered automatically, "A little over a year." Then he tensed. "Why?" Ethan shrugged. "Just wondering if she likes it here." Miles let out a humorless chuckle. "She doesn't, but she can't afford to leave." And there it was. The real problem. Jasmine wasn't just unhappy, she wasn't just stressed, she was trapped. Ethan's gut tightened. He'd seen situations like this before, where employees felt stuck, unable to walk away because of financial pressure, personal struggles, or worse. And now he had a feeling this wasn't just about a bad work environment. Something else was going on here. Something bigger. Before he could ask anything else, Miles stiffened. Ethan didn't have to turn around to know why. Thornton was walking toward them. The air shifted, thick with something unspoken. Ethan could feel the power dynamic in the room change in real time. "Everything okay over here?" Thornton asked, voice smooth but firm. Miles immediately dropped his gaze, busying himself with the papers in front of him. "Yes, sir, just helping a customer." Ethan turned, finally facing Thornton up close. Mid-40s, crisp suit, sharp features, eyes that had seen too much and cared too little. This wasn't just a bad boss. This was someone who knew exactly how much control he had. And he enjoyed it. The name tag on his blazer read Glenn Thornton. "Can I help you with something?" Thornton asked, tone polite but edged. Ethan offered a casual smile. "Just getting a pen. Miles here was kind enough to help me out." Thornton didn't break eye contact. "Good." He clapped Miles on the shoulder. "A little too firm. Let's stay focused on work." Miles nodded quickly, eyes fixed on the papers. "Yes, sir." Ethan clenched his jaw, but didn't react. Not yet. He thanked Miles and stepped away, feeling Thornton's eyes on him the entire time. As he made his way toward the door, his mind was already made up. He wasn't leaving. Not until he found out exactly what was happening in this bank. Ethan Walker stepped outside the bank, letting the cool evening air clear his head. He had enough experience to know this wasn't just an overbearing manager. This was control. This was fear. And fear didn't come from nowhere. He walked toward his car, taking out his phone to make it look like he was checking messages. But in reality, he was thinking. Hard. Something wasn't adding up. Jasmine was terrified. Miles was hesitant. And Thornton, he had the look of a man who thrived on power. Ethan had dealt with plenty of bad managers in his career, but this was different. This was calculated. If he wanted real answers, he needed to talk to someone who wasn't afraid. And then, as if the universe was working in his favor, Kenny stepped outside. The young teller from earlier stood near the side entrance, scrolling through his phone. Probably on a break. Ethan made his move. He approached casually, hands in his pockets. "Long day." Kenny looked up, startled, but then relaxed when he recognized him. "Yeah, Fridays are always busy." Ethan nodded. "Mind if I ask you something?" Kenny hesitated, but shrugged. "Sure." Keeping his voice light, Ethan said, "Your branch manager, Thornton. What's he like?" Kenny's expression darkened. It was quick, just a flicker, but Ethan caught it. "He's strict," Kenny said carefully. "Likes things done a certain way." Ethan tilted his head. "That normal for managers?" Kenny exhaled, glancing around as if checking for eavesdroppers. Then, He lowered his voice. He's not just strict, he's... Kenny struggled for the right word. Then, in a voice barely above a whisper, he said something that made Ethan's stomach turn. Makes her stay late, alone. Ethan's muscles tensed. She's the only one. Kenny nodded. Yeah, and he's always talking to her like she owes him something. I've seen it, man. The way she tenses up when he calls her into his office. It's not normal. Ethan's grip tightened around his arm. He'd seen this before. A manager who played power games with employees, singling out the vulnerable ones, making them feel like they had no choice but to obey. She ever say anything about it? Ethan asked. Kenny shook his head. No, but she doesn't have to. We all see it. Ethan let out a slow breath. Now he wasn't just dealing with a toxic boss. He was dealing with a predator. And that changed everything. Thanks for telling me, Kenny, Ethan said, patting him on the shoulder. You're a good guy. Kenny gave a half smile but still looked uneasy. Ethan turned, glancing back at the building. Jasmine was still inside, still under Thornton's control. And now Ethan knew exactly what he needed to do. Ethan Walker wasn't waiting. Not when he had seen this pattern before. He had climbed his way up through the banking world, and he knew how easy it was for a man in power to twist the system in his favor. The employees under Thornton's control weren't just uncomfortable. They were afraid. And Jasmine at the center of it. Ethan pushed open the glass doors and walked back inside. The bank was quieter now. Fewer customers, fewer witnesses. But Thornton was still there, standing near the teller stations, scanning the room like he owned it. Ethan's steps were steady as he crossed the lobby. He didn't stop at the counter. He didn't hesitate. He went straight for Jasmine. She was mid-conversation with a customer, her voice mechanical, her hands steady, but her eyes looked hollow. She saw Ethan approach and tense slightly, like she expected trouble. Excuse me, Ethan said, just loud enough for the customer to hear. I need to speak with you for a moment. Jasmine blinked, confused. I'm with a customer, sir. The older woman in front of her gave Ethan a sharp look. She's helping me right now. You can wait. But Ethan kept his eyes on Jasmine. It's important. And she knew. She swallowed, apologized to the customer, and stepped away from the counter. Thornton noticed immediately. Ethan saw him straighten, his eyes narrowing. He didn't like losing control. Jasmine led Ethan a few steps away, fidgeting with the edge of her blazer. What can I help you with, sir? Ethan took a slow breath. Now was the moment. I know what's happening. Jasmine flinched. For just a second. She looked like she might break. But she didn't. She shook her head, smiling tightly. I don't know what you mean. Ethan wasn't giving up. Thornton, the late shifts, the way he treats you, I know it's not okay. Jasmine's fingers curled into fists. Fear. That's what this was. And fear meant she thought there were no options left. I can't, she whispered. You can, Ethan said firmly, and you will, because I promise you. He's not untouchable. That's when Thornton walked over. Is there a problem here? He asked smoothly, his eyes flicking between them. Ethan turned to him, keeping his expression neutral. Just having a conversation. Thornton's smile didn't reach his eyes. Well, Jasmine has a job to do. She doesn't have time for private discussions. Jasmine froze at the word private. Ethan didn't miss it. Actually, Ethan said, I think we should have a conversation right now. Thornton's smirk faltered. Excuse me. Ethan didn't respond. Instead, he reached into his pocket and pulled out his wallet. He flipped it open, revealing his executive ID badge from Ashford National Bank. Jasmine gasped. Miles from across the room stared in shock. Thornton's face went completely blank. My name is Ethan Walker, he said. Voice steady. CEO of this bank. And you and I need to talk. Thornton's confidence cracked. For the first time that night, he looked uncertain. He opened his mouth, scrambling for an explanation. "Mr. Walker, Ethan didn't let him finish. "Your office. Now." The entire bank went silent. Employees froze at their stations. Customers exchanged glances, sensing something far bigger than an ordinary work dispute. Thornton hesitated, but he knew he had no choice. He straightened his tie, forced a stiff nod, and walked toward his office. Ethan followed closely behind. As the door shut, Thornton's demeanor shifted. The fear was still there, but now he was in damage control mode. "Sir, if I may explain." Etan sat down across from him, folding his hands on the desk. "No more lies." His voice was firm. "I know what you've been doing. The late shifts, the intimidation, the way you've been treating Jasmine." Thornton forced a chuckle. "Sir, I assure you, I've done nothing inappropriate." Ethan pulled out his phone, tapped the screen, and played a recording. Jasmine's voice, raw and shaken, filled the room. "If I don't do what he says, I'm gone." Then Miles' hushed response. "Jasmine, you can't let him. He doesn't own you." Thornton's face drained of color. Ethan leaned forward. "You should have known better." His voice was low, steady. "You've been playing this game for a long time, haven't you? Targeting employees who need their jobs the most, making them feel trapped." Thornton's hands trembled slightly. "Please, I can explain." "No," Ethan shook his head, "you can't." He reached for his phone again, this time dialing a number. "Who are you calling?" Thornton's voice wavered. "Corporate HR." Ethan's eyes locked onto him. "Your career here is over." Thornton slumped back into his chair, silent. He knew there was no way out. Within minutes, a corporate investigator was on the way. Thornton wouldn't be walking out of that office as a manager, or as an employee of Ashford National Bank. Ethan stepped out of the office. The tension in the lobby was thick. Jasmine, Miles, Kenny, everyone was waiting. Ethan took a slow breath, then looked directly at Jasmine. "He's gone." His voice was steady. "You're safe." Jasmine's lips parted slightly. She let out a shaky breath, relief washing over her face. Miles exhaled. Kenny looked stunned. Other employees exchanged glances, not sure whether to believe what had just happened. But Ethan knew this wasn't the end. He turned to the team. "From now on, this branch is under direct review. We're making changes. Not just replacing Thornton, but ensuring no one like him ever has this kind of power again." Miles hesitated, then spoke up. "Sir, this isn't just about Thornton." Ethan's gaze sharpened. "Go on." Miles took a step forward. His voice was stronger now. "The way things work here, it's not just one bad manager, it's the pressure, the fear of speaking up. It's bigger than just this branch." Kenny nodded in agreement. "A lot of us feel like we have no choice but to put up with it, because if we complain, we're out of a job." Jasmine looked down, guilt flickering across her face. "I wanted to leave so many times," she admitted, "but I couldn't afford to. And I thought, maybe this was just how things were." Ethan's jaw tightened. This was why he went undercover. He took a deep breath. This stops today. Everyone watched him, waiting for what came next. "I don't just want to fix this branch. I want to fix the system, and I need your help to do that." Jasmine still looked uncertain. "And if we do?" she asked quietly. "Will anyone actually listen?" Ethan met her eyes. "I will." She studied him for a long moment. Then finally, she nodded. "This story is more than just about one corrupt manager. It's about a system that allows abuse of power to thrive when no one is paying attention." Jasmine felt trapped. Miles and Kenny were afraid to speak up, and countless other employees had accepted mistreatment as just the way things are. But leadership isn't about control. It's about responsibility. Ethan didn't just fire Thornton. He took action to change the system, to make sure no one else would suffer in silence. How many times have we seen workplaces like this? Toxic environments where people feel powerless, afraid to speak up because they think no one will listen. This story teaches us that change doesn't happen unless someone is willing to step up. If you ever feel trapped in a situation where someone is abusing their power, speak up. If you see someone else struggling, don't stay silent. Sometimes all it takes is one person to break the cycle. If this story resonated with you, hit that like button, leave a comment and share this video, because you never know who might need to hear this today. And don't forget to subscribe for more powerful stories that uncover the truth and inspire change. Let's keep this conversation going.